The winter wind swept through downtown Chicago like a warning nobody wanted to hear. Snow drifted across the sidewalks outside the Cook County Criminal Courthouse, covering old footprints and forgotten promises. Inside, the atmosphere felt even colder despite the overheated building. The courtroom was packed with reporters, attorneys, police officers, and citizens who had learned long ago that justice often depended on who held power. Marcus Reed sat at the defense table beside his attorney, Rachel Bennett. At 19 years old, he looked exhausted. Dark circles hung beneath his eyes. His hands trembled slightly as he stared toward the judge's bench. 3 weeks earlier, Marcus had been arrested during a routine traffic stop after being accused of resisting arrest. The charge sounded simple. The consequences were not. A conviction would destroy his engineering scholarship and derail the future he had spent years building. Seated directly behind him was his aunt, Victoria Langford. At 44, Victoria carried herself with quiet confidence. She had built a reputation as one of Chicago's most respected state legislators. Yet she had not come to court as a politician. She had come as family. Marcus had lost both parents years earlier. Victoria had helped raise him. Watching him face a system she no longer trusted filled her with unease. Across the room stood Sergeant Daniel Mercer. He was broad-shouldered, physically imposing, and carried himself with the certainty of a man rarely challenged. His record appeared spotless. His reputation inside certain neighborhoods told a different story. Complaints followed him everywhere, but consequences never seemed to arrive. Citizens whispered about him, officers protected him, supervisors promoted him. Judge Harold Whitman entered the courtroom precisely at 9 o'clock. The room rose. After several preliminary matters, Marcus's case was called. Rachel Bennett immediately stood. Her voice was calm and precise. "Your Honor, the defense moves for dismissal based upon newly discovered evidence." The prosecutor looked surprised. Judge Whitman adjusted his glasses. "What evidence?" Rachel connected a laptop to the courtroom monitor. Grainy footage appeared on the screen. The video came from a delivery truck parked near Marcus's vehicle during the arrest. It showed Sergeant Mercer pulling Marcus from his car seconds after approaching the driver's window. No threat appeared. No resistance occurred. The room grew silent. Mercer's expression hardened instantly. "That footage doesn't show everything," he interrupted. Rachel remained composed. "It shows enough." Victoria watched carefully. She recognized something dangerous behind Mercer's eyes. It was not fear, it was outrage. Men like Mercer did not fear evidence. They feared losing control. The prosecutor requested time to review the video. Judge Whitman appeared uncertain. Before he could respond, Mercer stepped forward again. "These videos always get manipulated," he said loudly. "People don't understand what officers deal with every day." Victoria slowly rose from her seat. "Evidence isn't manipulation, Sergeant." Mercer turned toward her. Recognition flashed across his face. He knew exactly who she was. State Representative Victoria Langford had spent years pushing police accountability legislation. She had embarrassed powerful people. She had exposed misconduct others preferred to hide. "Representative Langford," Mercer said with a mocking smile, "still trying to tell officers how to do their jobs." The judge immediately intervened. "Sergeant, that's enough." But something had already shifted. Victoria met Mercer's stare without hesitation. She had debated governors, challenged corporate executives, and testified before congressional committees. Yet the hostility in Mercer's expression felt deeply personal. "The law applies equally to everyone," she replied calmly. "That includes people wearing badges." Mercer's smile vanished. Several reporters began typing furiously. The tension became almost physical. Outside, snow continued falling across Chicago. Inside, nobody noticed a young freelance journalist quietly streaming the hearing online to several thousand viewers. And in the back row sat a gray-haired man in an expensive suit. He had attended every hearing involving Sergeant Mercer for nearly 5 years. As he watched Victoria challenge the officer, he slowly removed his phone from his pocket and sent a single text message. The message contained only 6 words. "She's finally getting too close now." The video spread across Chicago faster than the winter storm moving over Lake Michigan. By noon, clips from the courtroom had appeared on social media feeds, local news stations, and political blogs. Viewers watched Representative Victoria Langford challenge Sergeant Daniel Mercer in open court. The footage itself revealed nothing explosive, but the confrontation ignited public curiosity. People began asking questions that city leaders preferred to avoid. Victoria spent the afternoon inside her downtown office overlooking the Chicago River. Grey clouds hung low across the skyline. The city appeared frozen beneath layers of snow and uncertainty. She sat behind her desk, reviewing documents, while her chief legal advisor, Rachel Bennett, paced nearby. "The prosecutor called," Rachel said. "They're considering dropping the charges against Marcus." Victoria nodded slowly. "They should. The evidence destroys their case." "That's not what worries me." Victoria looked up. Rachel stopped pacing. "Mercer isn't acting like someone afraid of exposure. He's acting like someone protected." The observation lingered in the room. Victoria had spent years inside politics. She recognized institutional behavior. Honest people feared investigations. Corrupt people feared discovery. Protected people feared nothing at all. Meanwhile, across the city, Daniel Mercer sat inside a private office at the police union headquarters. The building stood several blocks from City Hall, its polished exterior hiding decades of political influence. Across from Mercer sat Union President Richard Holloway. Holloway was 62 years old and carried the confidence of a man who knew secrets powerful enough to destroy careers. "The video looks bad," Holloway admitted. Mercer's jaw tightened. The kid was resisting. "That's not what people saw." "Then make them see something else." Holloway leaned back. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Finally, Holloway folded his hands. "Victoria Langford has become a problem." Mercer nodded. "She always has been." "Not like this." The older man's expression darkened. "She's digging again." Mercer understood immediately. Not many people knew about the old investigations. Fewer still understood how much had been buried. "You think she knows?" Mercer asked. "Not yet." The answer offered little comfort. Across town, Victoria received an unexpected visitor. A retired detective named Samuel Brooks arrived without an appointment. He was 70 years old, carried a weathered face, and walked with a slight limp. Victoria recognized him instantly. Years earlier, Brooks had testified against corruption inside a specialized police unit before abruptly disappearing from public view. "I don't have much time," Brooks said, after closing the office door. Victoria motioned toward a chair. "Then tell me why you're here." Brooks remained standing. "Because Daniel Mercer isn't the real problem." The room grew quiet. Rachel exchanged a glance with Victoria. Brooks lowered his voice. 20 years ago, there was an evidence theft investigation. Millions disappeared over several years. Cases vanished. Witnesses disappeared. Careers exploded overnight. Victoria listened carefully. "And Mercer?" "Mercer was a rookie. Then why does he matter?" Brooks hesitated. "Because somebody protected him." Victoria felt her pulse quicken. The retired detective reached into his coat pocket and removed a small flash drive. "I kept copies. Insurance." Rachel immediately stepped forward. "Copies of what?" Brooks placed the drive on Victoria's desk. "Personnel transfers, financial records, internal memos. Most were supposed to disappear." Victoria stared at the device. Years of unanswered questions suddenly seemed closer. "Why bring this now?" she asked. Brooks looked toward the snow-covered city outside the window. "Because people are getting nervous." "Who?" "The same people who made sure every investigation failed." Before Victoria could ask another question, Brooks moved toward the door. "Be careful," he said. "Careful of what?" The old detective paused. His expression carried genuine fear. "You're assuming Mercer is the wolf." He opened the door. "The truth is much worse. Mercer is only the guard dog." Then he left. Victoria immediately inserted the flash drive into her computer. Hundreds of files appeared. Personnel records, evidence reports, financial transactions, and one folder labeled simply Project Harbor. The timestamp showed it had not been opened in nearly 18 years. Victoria clicked the folder. A list of names appeared. Several belonged to retired officers. Several belonged to current city officials. One belonged to a sitting federal judge. And at the very top stood a name Victoria never expected to see, Richard Holloway. Victoria Langford barely slept that night. Snow tapped softly against her apartment windows while the city lights reflected across Lake Michigan. The files from the flash drive occupied her thoughts long after midnight. Every document seemed to raise more questions than answers. At sunrise, Chicago awoke beneath a blanket of fresh snow. Commuters filled train platforms. Coffee shops buzzed with conversation. Most citizens focused on ordinary concerns. Few realized that buried inside decades-old records was evidence capable of shaking the city to its foundations. Victoria arrived at her office before 7. Rachel Bennett was already there. 3 computer screens glowed in the conference room. Stacks of printed documents covered the table. "You need to see this," Rachel said. Victoria removed her coat and sat down. Rachel opened one of the files. Project Harbor wasn't an official police operation. Then what was it? Rachel hesitated. It appears to have been a private network operating inside public institutions. Victoria leaned forward. The records revealed a disturbing pattern. Evidence from major criminal cases had repeatedly disappeared. Confidential witnesses had withdrawn testimony. Financial assets seized during investigations often showed discrepancies. Money vanished. Cases collapsed. Careers advanced. The same names appeared repeatedly. Richard Holloway. Several senior officers, political donors, business executives, even judges. "This wasn't corruption," Rachel whispered. "It was infrastructure." Victoria understood exactly what she meant. Corruption suggested occasional wrongdoing. This looked systematic, organized, protected. Meanwhile, inside police headquarters, Daniel Mercer received unexpected news. His suspension had become official. Department leadership publicly described the action as procedural. Privately, Mercer knew better. Somebody was creating distance. He sat alone in a small office, reviewing news coverage. Every television station discussed Victoria Langford. Commentators debated police accountability. Editorials questioned Mercer's history. Public opinion was shifting rapidly. His phone suddenly rang. The caller identification displayed a blocked number. Mercer answered immediately. "Yeah," a calm voice responded. "Meet me tonight." Mercer's posture stiffened. He recognized the speaker. Why? Because circumstances have changed. The line disconnected. Mercer stared at the phone. For the first time in years, genuine anxiety crept into his thoughts. That evening, Victoria received another visitor. Unlike Samuel Brooks, this visitor arrived terrified. Her name was Angela Torres. She worked as a records administrator inside the police department. Her hands trembled visibly. She repeatedly glanced toward the office windows. "I shouldn't be here," Angela whispered. Victoria offered her a seat. "Then why did you come?" Angela removed a sealed envelope from her purse. "Because people are deleting files." Rachel immediately looked up. "What kind of files?" "Everything connected to Project Harbor." The room became silent. Angela swallowed hard. "Last night they emptied entire databases. They removed transfer records, internal investigations, evidence logs. Someone is panicking." Victoria accepted the envelope. Inside were printed screenshots, dates, authorization records, bolds, deletion requests, all executed within the previous 48 hours. One authorization code appeared repeatedly. Victoria recognized the name attached to it. "Richard Holloway. He's covering tracks," Rachel said. Angela nodded, "and anybody connected to those records is scared." Victoria studied the documents. A troubling realization emerged. If people were destroying evidence now, they already knew somebody was investigating, which meant somebody inside their circle was talking. Later that night, Daniel Mercer drove to an abandoned warehouse district along the Chicago River. Industrial buildings stood dark against the frozen skyline. The area had been largely deserted for years. Mercer parked beside an old loading dock. A black SUV waited nearby. Richard Holloway stepped out. Neither man greeted the other. The cold air hung between them. "You've become a problem," Holloway said. Mercer's eyes narrowed. "I didn't start this. You slapped a state representative inside a courtroom. And now everybody acts shocked." Holloway remained expressionless. "The situation is deteriorating." Mercer crossed his arms. "So what's the plan?" For several seconds, Holloway simply watched him. Then he delivered words Mercer never expected to hear. "There isn't one anymore." Mercer's stomach tightened. What does that mean? It means you're on your own. The silence that followed felt heavier than the winter sky. Mercer suddenly understood. They were abandoning him. Years of loyalty, years of silence, years of protecting other people, and now they intended to sacrifice him. As Holloway returned to his SUV, Mercer made a decision. A dangerous one. If they planned to bury him, he would not go quietly. Back downtown, Victoria finally opened the final document inside Angela's envelope. It contained a list of secure storage locations connected to Project Harbor. Most addresses were ordinary: warehouses, office buildings, storage facilities. One location immediately caught her attention. The address belonged to a property owned by a charitable foundation, a foundation publicly chaired by Chicago's most beloved philanthropist, a man celebrated for funding schools, hospitals, and community programs, a man currently being discussed as a possible candidate for governor. Victoria stared at the name. Then she slowly looked toward Rachel. This can't be right. Rachel read the document. The color drained from her face, because the name at the top of the property records was not Richard Holloway. It was Benjamin Cross, one of the most trusted men in Illinois. Benjamin Cross had spent 20 years building a reputation that seemed untouchable. His name appeared on hospitals, scholarship programs, youth centers, centers, and charity foundations throughout Illinois. Newspapers described him as a visionary businessman. Television networks called him a civic leader. Politicians lined up for photographs beside him. Victoria Langford stared at the document in disbelief. Outside her office window, Chicago glowed beneath a blanket of fresh snow. The city looked peaceful from above, yet every new discovery revealed another layer of deception hidden beneath that calm surface. There has to be an explanation, Rachel Bennett said. Victoria wished she believed that. She had met Benjamin Cross several times. He spoke softly, donated generously, funded educational programs, supported veterans' organizations. Nothing about him suggested criminal involvement, yet the property records were authentic, the signatures matched, the ownership trail was clear, and the address connected directly to Project Harbor. People like Cross don't make mistakes on paperwork, Victoria said quietly. Rachel nodded, especially not with properties worth millions. The realization settled heavily between them. Meanwhile, Daniel Mercer sat alone inside his house on Chicago's northwest side. The television remained muted. News anchors discussed growing questions surrounding police misconduct. Mercer barely listened, his attention focused on a small fireproof safe sitting on his kitchen table. For years, he had kept documents hidden inside. Insurance, protection, leverage, the same tools powerful people had taught him to use. Slowly, he opened the safe. Inside were photographs, financial records, meeting schedules, copies of confidential reports, enough information to destroy careers, enough information to save himself, or get himself killed. Mercer poured a glass of whiskey. His hands trembled slightly. For the first time, he understood exactly how expendable he had become. Across the city, Victoria and Rachel decided to investigate the property connected to Cross. The building stood in an industrial district south of downtown. Officially, it operated as a storage facility for charitable donations. Public records described it as a logistics center. Nothing unusual, nothing suspicious. Yet the parking lot remained active well after midnight. Delivery trucks arrived without company markings. Security cameras covered every entrance. Private guards monitored the perimeter. Victoria parked several blocks away. Snow crunched beneath their boots as they approached on foot. "This is excessive security for donated furniture," Rachel observed. Victoria agreed. Something about the operation felt wrong. As they watched from across the street, a black sedan entered through the front gate. The guards immediately opened access. Neither man checked identification, neither questioned the driver. The vehicle proceeded directly inside. Rachel raised a camera. The lens zoomed toward the windshield. Then she froze. "Victoria, what?" Rachel handed her the camera. Victoria looked through the screen. The driver was instantly recognizable. Judge Harold Whitman, the same judge who had presided over Marcus's hearing, the same judge who publicly claimed impartiality, the same judge whose name appeared nowhere in official investigations. Until now. Victoria lowered the camera slowly. The situation had just become far more dangerous. This was no longer about one corrupt officer. It was no longer about one union president. The network reached into courts, politics, business, law enforcement, every institution designed to protect the public. Back at her office later that night, Victoria received an encrypted email. The sender was anonymous. The message contained only one sentence. "Stop investigating Project Harbor if you want your nephew alive." Rachel immediately contacted federal authorities. Victoria remained silent. She had received threats before. Politics often attracted unstable individuals. This felt different. This threat came from somebody informed, somebody watching closely, somebody who knew exactly where to apply pressure. Marcus. Her stomach tightened. Within minutes she called him. No answer. She called again. Still nothing. A third call went directly to voicemail. Victoria stood abruptly. Something's wrong. Rachel was already grabbing her coat. 20 minutes later, they arrived at Marcus's apartment near the university campus. Police vehicles surrounded the building. Red and blue lights reflected across the snow. Victoria's pulse accelerated. She pushed through the crowd. "Where is Marcus Reed?" An officer recognized her immediately. His expression revealed concern. "Representative Langford, where is he?" The officer hesitated. Then he pointed toward the building entrance. His apartment was broken into. Victoria felt the world slow. Was he inside? No. Relief washed over her, only briefly. The officer continued speaking, but whoever entered wasn't looking for valuables. What were they looking for? The officer handed her a photograph recovered from inside the apartment. Victoria stared at it. The image showed Marcus walking across campus earlier that day. A red circle surrounded his face. Written beneath the picture were 4 chilling words. "You are next now," and taped to the back of the photograph was something even more disturbing. A recent picture of Victoria herself, taken only hours earlier. The photograph remained clenched in Victoria Langford's hand during the entire drive back downtown. Snow continued falling across Chicago, covering streets and rooftops beneath a silent white blanket. The city looked peaceful from a distance. Up close, it felt like a battlefield. Rachel Bennett drove while Victoria stared through the passenger window. Neither woman spoke for several minutes. The message was clear. Someone was watching, someone was willing to threaten Marcus, and someone had enough confidence to leave evidence behind. "This isn't intimidation anymore," Rachel finally said. Victoria nodded. "No, it's escalation." When they reached the office, federal agents were already waiting. Special Agent Nathan Reyes introduced himself with a firm handshake. He was in his early 40s, calm, disciplined, and impossible to read. The FBI had quietly begun monitoring developments after receiving information regarding Project Harbor. Now the investigation had become official. Victoria handed him the photograph. Reyes examined it carefully. "Professional surveillance," he said. "How can you tell?" "The angles, the timing. Whoever took these photographs knew your routines." The answer did not comfort anyone. Victoria sat down. "Can you protect Marcus?" "Yes." "Can you stop whoever is behind this?" Reyes hesitated. "That depends on how high this goes." The room became quiet. Everyone already knew the answer. Much higher than anyone originally believed. Meanwhile, across Chicago, Benjamin Cross sat inside the penthouse office of Cross Foundation headquarters. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline. The room projected success, power, respectability. Benjamin stood beside the glass holding a cup of coffee. The morning newspapers lay open across his desk. Every headline discussed corruption investigations. Every article mentioned Victoria Langford. His chief advisor entered the office. "The situation is accelerating," the man said. Benjamin remained calm. "How much does she know?" "Enough to be dangerous." The older businessman slowly turned. His expression revealed no panic, only calculation. "And Mercer?" "Unstable," Benjamin sighed. "That was always going to happen eventually." For years, Daniel Mercer had been useful. Aggressive men often were. They performed tasks others avoided. The problem was that useful men eventually became liabilities, and liabilities required management. Benjamin returned his attention to the city below. Prepare contingency plans. The advisor nodded. All of them? Benjamin's voice remained steady. All of them. Later that afternoon, Agent Reyes brought unexpected news. His team had tracked recent financial transactions connected to Project Harbor. Several accounts led directly to offshore entities, others connected to shell corporations. One transfer immediately caught attention. Nearly $4 million had moved out of the country 3 days earlier. The destination account belonged to a corporation based in the Cayman Islands. The authorized signature belonged to Richard Holloway. Victoria studied the report. He's preparing to run. Reyes nodded. That's our assessment. Rachel looked concerned. Then we need evidence before he disappears. Agreed, Reyes said. He placed another folder on the table. There's more. Victoria opened it. Inside were surveillance photographs. Recent ones. Several showed Richard Holloway. Several showed Judge Whitman. Several showed Benjamin Cross. All entering the same warehouse facility. The dates stretched across nearly 10 years. The pattern was undeniable. The warehouse was not a storage center. It was a meeting place, a headquarters, a command center hidden in plain sight. Then Reyes revealed the most important discovery yet. We've identified a witness. Victoria looked up immediately. Who? A former accountant. The agent opened another file. A photograph appeared. The woman looked exhausted, frightened, desperate. Her name is Emily Carter. Victoria studied the image. What does she know? No. Reyes leaned forward. Everything. The room fell silent. Emily Carter had managed financial records for multiple entities connected to Project Harbor. She maintained ledgers, authorized transfers, processed payments for nearly 12 years. According to Reyes, she had recently contacted federal authorities seeking immunity. Can she testify? Rachel asked. Yes. Then why hasn't she already? Reyes looked toward the window. The answer appeared to trouble even him. Because she disappeared yesterday. Victoria felt a chill run through her body. Disappeared? The agent nodded. She was under observation. Then she vanished. No phone activity, no financial activity, no confirmed sightings. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Victoria asked the question everyone feared. Do you think she's dead? Reyes didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slid a final photograph across the table. The image had been captured by a traffic camera 12 hours earlier. It showed a black SUV leaving Chicago shortly before dawn. Inside the rear passenger seat sat a woman, Emily Carter, and driving the vehicle was someone Victoria recognized instantly. Judge Harold Whitman. The photograph of Judge Harold Whitman driving the black SUV changed everything. Victoria Langford stared at the image while silence settled across the conference room. Until that moment, corruption had appeared extensive but manageable. Now the situation felt far more dangerous. A sitting judge was no longer merely connected to the network. He was actively participating in it. Agent Nathan Reyes closed the file. This stays confidential. Well, he said. If word gets out too early, everyone involved disappears. Victoria nodded, including Benjamin Cross. Especially Benjamin Cross. Outside, Chicago's winter sky darkened as another storm approached from the west. Snow swirled between skyscrapers. The city seemed trapped beneath an endless season of cold. Meanwhile, several hundred miles south, a black SUV rolled through rural Missouri along a nearly deserted highway. Emily Carter sat in the rear seat. Her hands were trembling. She had not spoken in almost an hour. Judge Whitman drove quietly. The road stretched endlessly before them. Finally, Emily broke the silence. Where are you taking me? Whitman kept his eyes on the road. Somewhere safe. She laughed bitterly. People usually say that right before something terrible happens. The judge remained expressionless. Emily studied him carefully. For years, she had processed financial records tied to Project Harbor. She knew how much money flowed through the organization. She knew which politicians benefited. She knew which judges accepted favors. Most importantly, she knew who controlled everything. Benjamin Cross. The realization had terrified her. The evidence sitting inside her encrypted files could send dozens of powerful people to prison. It could also get her killed. Back in Chicago, Daniel Mercer received unexpected visitors. Two men arrived at his house shortly after sunset. Neither identified themselves, neither needed to. Mercer recognized them immediately. Both had worked security details connected to Project Harbor. Both had reputations for solving problems, permanent problems. "You need to come with us," one man said. Mercer's pulse accelerated. "Why?" The men exchanged a glance. "Mr. Cross wants a conversation." Mercer knew enough to understand what that meant. Benjamin Cross never requested conversations, he requested outcomes. The suspended sergeant looked toward the kitchen table. His fireproof safe sat exactly where he had left it. Inside remained copies of evidence. Insurance, leverage, survival. Mercer suddenly understood that survival was becoming less likely. "Give me 10 minutes, he said. The men nodded. As they stepped outside, Mercer immediately opened the safe. His hands moved quickly. Photographs, financial ledgers, names, account numbers, meeting records. Enough information to expose everyone. Mercer stuffed everything into a duffel bag. Then he slipped out through the back door. By the time the two men realized he was gone, Daniel Mercer was already racing through snow-covered side streets toward downtown Chicago. For the first time in years, the hunter had become prey. Hours later, Victoria received a frantic phone call. The number was unfamiliar. She answered cautiously. "Hello?" Heavy breathing filled the line. Then a familiar voice spoke. "They're trying to kill me." Victoria immediately recognized Daniel Mercer. She stood from her chair. "Where are you?" "Doesn't matter." "It matters if you want help." Mercer laughed nervously. The sound contained genuine fear. "You were right about everything." Victoria remained silent. "Mercer," she said carefully, "what do you want?" A long pause followed. When he finally answered, his voice sounded broken. "I want a deal." Victoria exchanged a glance with Agent Reyes. The FBI agent immediately activated a recording device. "What kind of deal?" Victoria asked. "Protection." "From who?" Another pause, then Mercer whispered the name, Benjamin Cross. The room became completely still. Outside, snow hammered against the windows. Inside, years of corruption suddenly seemed within reach. Mercer's voice shook. "You think Holloway runs Project Harbor? He doesn't. You think the judge matters? He doesn't. They're employees. That's all they've ever been." Victoria felt her heart racing. "Then who's in charge?" Mercer exhaled slowly. "Cross built the entire thing." Agent Reyes leaned closer. Every word now mattered. "Can you prove it?" Victoria asked. "Yes." "How?" Mercer's answer came immediately. "I have the master ledger." Nobody spoke. The master ledger, the document investigators had searched for over a decade. The record connecting every payment, every bribe, every stolen dollar, every protected official, every crime. Victoria closed her eyes briefly, then she asked the question that would determine everything. "Where is it?" Mercer hesitated. For several seconds, only static filled the line. Then he spoke. "I'll tell you in person." A sudden crash exploded through the phone. Mercer shouted. Voices yelled in the background. Glass shattered. Then the line went dead. Victoria stared at her phone. Agent Reyes was already moving. "Trace the call," he ordered. An analyst immediately began working. 30 seconds later, the location appeared. An abandoned church on Chicago's south side. Victoria's stomach tightened, because she recognized the address instantly. It was the same church where Samuel Brooks, the retired detective, had been found murdered 11 years earlier. Snow fell heavily across Chicago as FBI vehicles raced through the city streets. Their flashing lights reflected off frozen pavement and dark storefront windows. The storm reduced visibility, turning the city into a maze of shadows and uncertainty. Victoria Langford sat beside Agent Nathan Reyes in an unmarked SUV. Neither spoke much during the drive. The abandoned church stood less than 15 minutes away, yet every second felt important. If Daniel Mercer was telling the truth, he possessed the most valuable piece of evidence in the entire investigation, the master ledger. Years of corruption recorded in one place. Names, transactions, crimes, enough information to destroy Project Harbor forever, or enough motivation to get Mercer killed. The church appeared through the snowfall shortly before midnight. Its stained glass windows were broken. Its roof sagged from decades of neglect. The building stood alone among abandoned houses and empty lots. Agent Reyes ordered a perimeter immediately. FBI agents spread through the surrounding streets, weapons drawn, flashlights sweeping through the darkness. Victoria remained inside the vehicle. Every instinct told her something had gone terribly wrong. Minutes later, Reyes entered the church with a tactical team. The silence that followed felt endless. Finally, his radio crackled. "We found him." Victoria's heart sank. She stepped out into the freezing night. Snow struck her face as she hurried toward the entrance. Inside, the church smelled of dust, mold, and old wood. Broken pews littered the sanctuary. Moonlight filtered through shattered, stained glass. At the center of the room sat Daniel Mercer. Alive, barely. Blood covered his shirt. A gunshot wound marked his shoulder. His face looked pale beneath the flashlight beams, yet he was conscious. "Took you long enough," he muttered. Victoria approached carefully. "Who did this?" Mercer laughed weakly. "Take a guess." Paramedics moved toward him. He immediately grabbed Victoria's wrist. His grip surprised her. "No hospital. You're bleeding. Listen to me." The urgency in his voice silenced everyone nearby. Mercer's eyes locked onto hers. "Cross knows I'm talking." Victoria remained calm. "Where's the ledger?" Mercer glanced toward Agent Reyes, then toward the ruined altar. Underneath, Reyes immediately signaled agents. Within moments, they began pulling away rotted floorboards. Victoria never looked away from Mercer. The former sergeant appeared exhausted, defeated, like a man finally realizing the full cost of his choices. "Why now?" she asked quietly. Mercer closed his eyes briefly. "Because I spent years believing I mattered." His voice cracked. "Turns out I was just another disposable employee." The words carried genuine regret, not redemption, not forgiveness, simply regret. A sudden shout interrupted the conversation. "We found something." Every head turned. Agents had uncovered a steel lockbox hidden beneath the church floor. The container looked old, heavy, deliberately concealed. Agent Reyes personally opened it. Inside sat several hard drives, financial ledgers, photographs, audio recordings, thousands of pages of documentation, the master ledger. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Years of secrets rested inside a weathered steel box. Mercer stared toward it. Then he looked at Victoria. "That's everything." His voice had become weaker. "Every payment, every judge, every politician, every officer." Victoria followed his gaze. The evidence represented justice, but also danger. Because once Project Harbor realized the ledger had been recovered, everyone connected to it would panic. And desperate people made desperate decisions. As if summoned by that thought, Agent Reyes received an urgent call. His expression changed instantly. "What happened?" The answer came through the radio. Victoria watched the color drain from his face. "When?" Another pause. Then Reyes lowered the radio slowly. The church became silent. "Agent?" Victoria asked. Reyes looked directly at her. "We just received confirmation from Missouri." Something in his voice made her uneasy. "About Emily Carter?" He nodded. "Her vehicle was found. Is she alive?" The FBI agent hesitated. Then he delivered the news. "Emily Carter is alive." Relief flooded the room, only briefly, because Reyes continued speaking. "But Judge Whitman is dead." The words echoed through the abandoned church. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. A federal judge had just been murdered, which meant Project Harbor was no longer covering its tracks. It was eliminating witnesses, and Benjamin Cross had just declared open war. The news of Judge Harold Whitman's death hit Chicago before sunrise. Television stations interrupted regular programming. News alerts flashed across phones. Radio hosts abandoned scheduled segments. By morning, every major network carried the same headline: "Federal Judge Found Dead During Corruption Investigation." The city reacted with shock. Inside government offices, panic spread. Inside Project Harbor, fear became something far more dangerous. Victoria Langford stood inside the FBI field office overlooking downtown Chicago. The storm had finally passed. Pale sunlight reflected off snow-covered rooftops. For the first time in days, the sky appeared clear. The mood inside the building was anything but. Teams of agents worked around the clock analyzing the contents of the master ledger. Every hour revealed new crimes. Every document exposed another connection. Every recording expanded the conspiracy. Agent Nathan Reyes entered the conference room carrying several folders. His expression was grim. "The ledger is authentic," he said. Victoria looked up. "How bad is it?" Reyes placed the files on the table. "Worse than we imagined. The records detailed nearly 15 years of corruption, bribes, election interference, money laundering, evidence theft, witness intimidation, illegal surveillance, even contract killings disguised as accidents. Several public officials immediately resigned after learning investigators possessed the documents. Others disappeared. Some attempted to flee the country. Federal arrest teams were already moving, but one target remained elusive. Benjamin Cross, the architect, the financier, the man at the center of everything. Meanwhile, Benjamin Cross sat aboard a private jet preparing for departure. The aircraft waited inside a secure hangar at a private airport outside Chicago. His luggage had already been loaded. His legal team had disappeared. Several associates had stopped answering calls. The empire he spent decades building was collapsing. Yet Benjamin remained remarkably calm. A lifetime of power had taught him one lesson: money created options. Even now, especially now, his chief advisor entered the cabin. "Federal warrants are being issued." Benjamin nodded. "Expected." They recovered the ledger. For the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed his face. Not panic, disappointment. "Mercer," he said quietly. The advisor nodded. "Yes." Benjamin stared through the window. The runway stretched into the distance. For years he had controlled politicians, judges, police officials, and business leaders. Now everything depended on leaving before federal agents arrived. His phone suddenly vibrated. An encrypted message appeared. Only 3 words: "Do not depart." Benjamin frowned. The sender was unknown. A second message arrived seconds later. "They know everything." The businessman slowly lowered the phone. For the first time, uncertainty entered his thoughts. Back in Chicago, Agent Reyes received urgent intelligence. A financial analyst had traced emergency fund transfers connected to Project Harbor. The transactions pointed directly toward the private airport. Reyes immediately stood. "We found him." Victoria rose as well. "Cross? He's preparing to leave." Within minutes, federal vehicles streamed toward the airport. Helicopters lifted into the winter sky. Roadblocks were established, every available agent mobilized. The operation unfolded rapidly. Yet Benjamin Cross had spent decades anticipating worst-case scenarios. As federal teams approached the airport perimeter, they discovered something unexpected. The private jet remained inside the hangar, empty. No passengers, no crew, no Benjamin Cross. The aircraft had become a decoy. Victoria arrived shortly afterward. She watched agents search the facility. Frustration spread visibly through the command staff. Hours of preparation, perfect intelligence, and still Cross had escaped. Then an analyst ran toward Agent Reyes. "Sir, we found something." The analyst handed over airport surveillance footage. The recording showed Benjamin Cross leaving the property nearly 2 hours earlier, not by plane, not by helicopter, by ambulance. The vehicle had departed under emergency medical authorization. Nobody stopped it. Nobody questioned it. Victoria watched the footage carefully. Then she noticed something strange. The ambulance destination appeared in the transport logs. Her eyes widened. "No." Reyes looked at her. "What is it?" Victoria pointed at the screen. The listed destination was not a hospital. It was the Cross Foundation Community Center, the same building where Benjamin Cross planned to deliver a televised charity speech later that evening. The same event expected to attract hundreds of citizens and dozens of reporters. Victoria felt a chill run through her body, because she suddenly understood. Benjamin Cross wasn't running. He was preparing something else, something public, something desperate, something that could change the entire investigation forever. By late afternoon, Chicago felt like a city holding its breath. News helicopters circled overhead. Federal agents coordinated from temporary command centers. Television crews gathered outside the Cross Foundation Community Center. The event had been advertised for weeks. Benjamin Cross was scheduled to announce a massive expansion of his educational charity network. Hundreds of people had already arrived: families, students, volunteers, donors. Most had no idea they were walking into the center of a federal corruption investigation. Victoria Langford stood inside a command vehicle parked 3 blocks away. Large monitors displayed live surveillance feeds. Agent Nathan Reyes studied floor plans spread across a folding table. The atmosphere was tense. "What's his endgame?" Victoria asked. Reyes shook his head. "We don't know yet." That uncertainty worried everyone. Benjamin Cross had spent decades staying several moves ahead of opponents. Men like him rarely acted without purpose, and desperate men often became unpredictable. Inside the community center, reporters filled rows of seats facing a brightly lit stage. Banners displayed charitable slogans. Volunteers distributed programs. Everything appeared normal, carefully designed, professional, safe, which made Victoria even more suspicious. Then a federal analyst rushed into the command vehicle. "We found something in the Foundation servers." Reyes immediately looked up. "What?" The analyst handed him a tablet. Several encrypted files had been recovered during a raid earlier that afternoon. One file contained a schedule, another contained financial transfers, a third contained communication records. Victoria watched Reyes review the documents. His expression darkened instantly. "My God, what is it?" Victoria asked. The agent looked at her. "Cross doesn't intend to escape." The realization struck like lightning. Then why is he here? Reyes pointed at the screen. The recovered messages revealed the truth. Project Harbor had maintained emergency contingency plans for years. If exposure became unavoidable, certain members would receive immunity in exchange for cooperation. Others would become scapegoats. And a final option existed: public confession, a controlled narrative, a strategic sacrifice designed to preserve the larger network. Victoria's eyes widened. He's going to blame everything on Holloway and Mercer. Exactly. Benjamin Cross intended to portray himself as an innocent philanthropist, deceived by corrupt associates. He would publicly condemn corruption, express outrage, cooperate with authorities, and emerge as a victim. If successful, he might save himself and protect countless hidden allies. "We need to stop him," Victoria said. Reyes nodded. "Not yet." "Why not?" "Because we need him talking." Minutes later, the event began. The auditorium filled completely. Camera crews activated live broadcasts. Millions of viewers watched from across the country. Then Benjamin Cross walked onto the stage. The audience applauded. He looked calm, confident, almost presidential. Victoria watched from a secure monitoring room inside a nearby federal building. She studied his face carefully. No fear, no panic, only calculation. Cross approached the podium. The room grew quiet. "Good evening," he began. His voice carried warmth and authority. Years of public speaking had perfected the performance. "Today, our city faces difficult questions." Victoria felt her stomach tighten. The speech was beginning exactly as investigators predicted. Cross spoke about integrity, accountability, public trust. He condemned corruption, expressed sympathy for victims, promised transparency. The audience listened attentively. Many believed him. Then everything changed. A young woman suddenly stood near the back of the auditorium. At first, nobody recognized her. Then Victoria gasped. Emily Carter. Alive, standing in plain sight. The room erupted into confusion. Reporters immediately turned cameras toward her. Benjamin Cross froze. For the first time all day, genuine shock appeared on his face. Emily stepped into the aisle. Her voice echoed through the silent auditorium. "He's lying." Nobody moved, nobody spoke. Cross stared at her as if seeing a ghost. Emily continued walking toward the stage. "I processed every payment." The audience remained completely silent. Every bribe, every transfer, every payoff. Cross's composure began to crack. Television cameras captured everything live. Millions watched nationwide. Then Emily pulled a small flash drive from her pocket. "And I made copies." Victoria felt her pulse race. The room had transformed instantly. Cross was no longer controlling the narrative. He was losing it. Security personnel started moving. Federal agents rushed toward the auditorium, but before anyone reached the stage, Benjamin Cross did something nobody expected. He slowly reached into his jacket and pulled out a handgun. The audience screamed. The live broadcast cut abruptly to black, and Victoria realized the final battle had just begun. The auditorium descended into chaos. People screamed, chairs overturned, reporters abandoned equipment, parents grabbed children, security personnel rushed toward the stage. For several terrifying seconds, nobody knew what Benjamin Cross intended to do. Victoria Langford watched from the Federal Monitoring Center, her heart pounding. The live broadcast had cut away, but internal security feeds continued transmitting. Every camera remained focused on the stage. Every second felt endless. Benjamin Cross stood motionless beneath the bright lights. The handgun remained in his hand. Emily Carter had frozen several feet away. Federal agents moved cautiously through the crowd. No one wanted a gunfight inside a packed community center. Cross slowly looked around the room. For the first time in decades, he appeared old. Not powerful, not influential, not untouchable, just old. Years of carefully constructed prestige were collapsing in front of millions. The audience that once admired him now stared with fear and disbelief. The illusion was gone. Agent Nathan Reyes entered through a side door with a tactical team. Weapons remained lowered. "Benjamin," Reyes called. Cross looked toward him. "It's over." The businessman laughed softly. The sound carried exhaustion rather than amusement. "You think this ends with me?" Nobody answered, because everyone knew the truth. Project Harbor had infected institutions for years. One arrest would not erase decades of damage. Cross lowered the handgun slightly. His gaze drifted toward Emily Carter, then toward the cameras, then toward the frightened crowd. "I spent 20 years building hospitals," he said. "Scholarships, community centers, housing projects." His voice echoed through the silent auditorium. "And nobody remembers any of that." Emily stepped forward. "Because none of it excuses what you did." Cross stared at her. For several moments he said nothing. Then he slowly nodded. Perhaps for the first time, he understood. Power had convinced him that outcomes mattered more than methods, that success justified corruption, that influence created immunity. The same arrogance had destroyed Daniel Mercer, Richard Holloway, Judge Whitman, and now him. Outside the building, federal agents completed the perimeter. Inside, Benjamin Cross finally made a decision. He placed the handgun on the stage floor, then he raised both hands. The room exhaled collectively. Agent Reyes moved forward immediately. Handcuffs clicked around Cross's wrists. The architect of Project Harbor was finally in custody. Across Chicago, the news spread instantly. Crowds gathered outside government buildings. Citizens watched giant screens. Families discussed events around dinner tables. For many people, it felt impossible. Powerful figures rarely faced consequences, yet this time they had. The following months transformed the city. Federal prosecutions expanded rapidly. Dozens of officials were arrested. Hundreds of cases were reopened. Wrongful convictions received review. Corrupt contracts were cancelled. Hidden financial networks were dismantled. The process was messy, expensive, painful, but necessary. Daniel Mercer eventually testified against dozens of former associates. His prison sentence remained severe. No cooperation could erase years of abuse. Richard Holloway received multiple life sentences. Several judges resigned. Others faced criminal charges. Benjamin Cross spent the remainder of his life fighting federal indictments he could never escape. 1 year later, Victoria stood beside Lake Michigan at sunrise. Spring had finally returned to Chicago. The ice was gone. The water reflected golden light across the skyline. Marcus Reed stood nearby. His engineering degree was nearly complete. His future belonged to him again. For a while, neither spoke. They simply watched the city awaken. Finally, tersely, Marcus broke the silence. Was it worth it? Victoria smiled thoughtfully. The question carried enormous weight. The investigation had cost friendships, political alliances, personal safety, peace of mind, yet it had also revealed something important. Truth mattered, even when inconvenient. Even when dangerous, especially then. "Yes," she answered. Marcus looked toward the skyline. Because we won? Victoria shook her head. No. She watched sunlight spread across the city. Because people stopped being afraid. The wind carried across the water, fresh, clean, full of possibility. Chicago remained imperfect. It always would. But institutions had been forced to confront their failures. Citizens had discovered their voices. And one act of arrogance had exposed an empire built on lies. The lesson would outlive every headline. Authority without accountability eventually destroys itself. Truth may move slowly, justice may arrive late, but neither disappears forever. As the sun climbed higher above the city, Victoria turned away from the shoreline and walked toward the future. There was still work to do. There always would be. But for the first time in a very long while, hope felt stronger than fear. Subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and share this video.